I wish to warmly welcome Secretary General António Guterres, Your Excellency, and give you the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to brief the Council on the United Nations work on preventive diplomacy, conflict prevention, and resolution in Africa. All our work on conflict prevention and resolution relies on partnerships with member states, regional and sub-regional organizations, and regional economic communities and others. And the African Union is our key strategic partner across the continent. And I welcome the leadership of His Excellency Mr. Moussa Faki Muhammad, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, that has participated in so many of our debates. Mr. President, we are making progress on conflict prevention together with our partners in many parts of Africa. In the Gambia, for example, joint action by the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, and the United Nations and neighboring countries prevented the political crisis from spiraling in and supported a peaceful and democratic transition 2 years ago. In Madagascar, we worked with the African Union, the European Union, the Southern African Development Community, and the International Organization de la Francophonie to facilitate dialogue, which contributed to the peaceful presidential election last year. Our Good Office's efforts, together with those of the African Union, the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries, ECOWAS, and the European Union, have been instrumental in addressing political tensions in Guinea-Bissau. And I urge all parties to work for a peaceful, transparent, free and fair election next month. In Cameroon, my Special Representative for Central Africa is working with the authorities and with national and regional stakeholders to support efforts to address the root causes of the crisis in the northwest and southwest regions through an inclusive dialogue. And the conclusions of the national dialogue have just been published. The recent agreement in Sudan, brokered by the African Union and Ethiopia, is an opportunity for the international community to support peace at a delicate time in a country that has seen terrible conflict and suffering. And my Special Representative for West Africa and the Sahel conducted joint efforts with ECOWAS and the African Union to support peaceful and inclusive election processes in Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Senegal. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, terrorism is a growing threat across Africa, with serious implications for peace and security everywhere. In the Sahel, terrorist groups regularly attack local and international security forces. There was a further death yesterday, including our blue helmets serving with MINUSMA. The violence is spreading to coastal states along the Gulf of Guinea. In Nigeria, Boko Haram and its splinter factions are terrorizing local communities and attacking security forces, despite the efforts of the multinational Joint Task Force. We are seeing terrorist networks across Libya and North Africa, stretching through the Sahel to the Lake Chad region, and present in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Mozambique. This is a battle that we are not winning. And this is not just a regional issue, but a clear and present danger to global peace and security. I welcome last month's ECOWAS summit in Burkina Faso in Ouagadougou and the renewed commitment of the ECOWAS member states to participate both financially and militarily in the fight against terrorism. We must recognize that the impacts of the crisis in Libya is growing and spreading throughout the region as weapons and fighters continually move across borders. As you know, my special representative is working with national, regional and international partners to prevent a further escalation of violence and promote a return to the political process. I have already sent the President of the Security Council a copy of the letter from the President of the African Union Commission presenting the proposal from the Peace and Security Council of the African Union to this Council, and I look forward to enhanced cooperation with the African Union on Libya. Peace in Mali is also essential to peace in the Sahel. Despite the terrible attacks in the Mopti region last week, I hope plans for an inclusive political dialogue, the terms of reference of which have been agreed, will facilitate the implementation of the 2015 peace agreement. Our peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA, plays a critical role in supporting the implementation of the agreement and requires continued strong support. African military operations, including AMISOM, the G5 Sahel Joint Force, the Multinational Joint Task Force against Boko Haram, and others, deserve our support. I welcome your decision to lift geographic restrictions on provisions by MINUSMA to the G5 Sahel Joint Force. But this alone is not enough. I urge you again to provide African peace enforcing and counter-terrorist operations with clear mandates, backed by predictable and sustainable financial support through assessed contributions. Mr. President, sustainable, inclusive development is an end in itself. It is also the most effective way to address the underlying causes of conflict, extremism, and terrorism. Tackling poverty and inequality, strengthening state institutions and civil society, and promoting human rights are essential to preventing conflict and building resilient communities and societies. These goals are central to both the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union's Agenda 2063. We are working in full alignment with the AU through our joint framework on sustainable development for a peaceful and prosperous Africa, with a strong focus on inclusivity, women's rights, and gender equality. Women's meaningful participation and leadership will strengthen our responses and are essential to lasting peace. Addressing the climate crisis is another vital preventive measure. Climate-related risks, including droughts, floods, and changing rainfall patterns, often intersect with political, social, and economic factors. We must urgently reduce emissions to prevent catastrophic consequences for sustainable development and security across Africa, and step up support for the countries most affected. Today, it is indisputable that climate change has aggravated security challenges, particularly in the Sahel. Nearly half of Africa's population of 1.3 billion are under the age of 15. Education, training, and job opportunities for this generation must be central to any development strategy. As we saw most recently in Sudan, women and young people are key builders of peaceful societies. I urge you to work with them and for them far more effectively.
Mr. President, when prevention fails, the United Nations work with our partners to reduce suffering, resolve conflicts, and build sustainable peace. We strongly support the African Union's Silence the Guns 2020 initiative as a basis for advancing peace and security and offering a safer and better future. I commend the Security Council for its resolution on this initiative and for emphasizing the role of young people. Our enhanced strategic partnership with the African Union on peace and security is based on the Joint Framework Agreement of 2017. It was demonstrated again in February when this Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2457 on steps towards ending conflict in Africa through enhanced international cooperation and partnership. Our largest peacekeeping missions are on the African continent, and more than 80,000 peacekeepers serve there. And Africa is now the largest troop-contributing region. We owe these Blue Helmets our strong and united support through robust funding and strong mandates. I commend the Council's cooperation with the African Union, including with the AU's Peace and Security Council. Across the continent, the United Nations is working in steadfast and close cooperation with the African Union and African sub-regional organizations to prevent and resolve conflicts. The Central African Republic is just one example. The United Nations, the African Union, and others are cooperating in support of the historic agreement reached in February to end violence against civilians, strengthen the extension of state authority, and bring social development to this conflict-ravaged country. Mr. President, conflict prevention is difficult to quantify and may not make news. But no news is good news for the people we serve, prevention brings enormous rewards. Conflict prevention and resolution depend on the engagement of the parties involved. Beyond that, they require a united international position and a commitment to shared goals. The Council's strong engagement in prevention of efforts on the African continent, in collaboration with regional and sub-regional partners, is needed and appreciated more than ever. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing.